All right, guys. So this is Shawn Ray. We're doing a new series called Shawn Ray Unleashed for Muscular Development, and each week we're going to attack a different topic. And you'll be able to come back to the forums and you can debate the pros and cons of the conversation online. Right now, we've got a hot topic going around about who is the greatest 212-pound bodybuilder ever. So naturally, I'm in that conversation. And before I get started talking about myself, let me give a little bit of background about the players. In 2001, I competed in my final Mr. Olympia competition. Finished with 12 top 5 finishes out of the 13 years, 2 second place finalists. And in 2001, I retired. It wasn't until 2007 that, out of demand, I was instrumental in creating the first ever 202-pound competition in New York. That was a contest won by David Henry, who would go on to win the very first 202 Olympia Showdown Championships in Las Vegas. Naturally, that would give room and way for Kevin English, a former 3-time champion there, and now, of course, the 4-time champion in James Flex Lewis. We went up from 202 pounds to 212 pounds. That being said, there's a few other notables in this conversation that I got to address. Naturally, I'd have to think about the sub 200-pound Egyptian Mohamed Makaway. I mean, he was a 2-time first Olympia runner-up. Phenomenal. Problem was, his front side was much more superior than his backside, and he was very, very complete as a bodybuilder, but he had a few things that were not fully developed, especially from the rear, and we all know a lot of the great bodybuilders are complete from front to back, which would land us into the conversation about Lee Labrada. Masked with Class. Lee Labrada, another sub 200-pound bodybuilder, 2-time Mr. Olympia runner-up, is in the conversation on his complete frame. However, again, from the rear, Labrada didn't stack up. He didn't have the hamstrings, he didn't have the back density, nor did he have the back width. And I was a young guy coming up behind Labrada, finally caught up to Labrada in 1993 and surpassed him. He would go on to retire in 1995 with 2 first Olympia runner-ups under 200 pounds. Other notables, you'd have to mention Danny Padilla, but at the same time, you're only as good as the people you stand next to. And Danny Padilla just simply did not stand next to the quality of bodybuilders that came after him. Danny was a good little bodybuilder, but in the bodybuilding in the 90s and beyond, I think Danny would struggle to be in that top 5 mix with some of the other smaller guys. One that could be in that mix would be the 1983 Mr. Olympia, Samir Banu. Samir Banu arguably was one of the best bodybuilders, 212 pounds and under, for that one given year in 1983. He was phenomenal front to back, and on that given year could arguably be one of the guys that no one could beat. So he's high on my list of very competitive bodybuilders that were at the very pinnacle, and he did get acknowledged and recognized for his efforts. We move on ahead to David Henry. David Henry was a good bodybuilder who beat a lot of okay bodybuilders to win the Olympia Showdown Championships. Kevin English, the same can be said. There's a lot of things that are forgettable about Kevin English, and there's a few things that are not forgettable. One thing that we won't say about Kevin English is that he's complete and that he's beautiful and that he's perfect. Had a lot of muscle, was kind of slapped on in different areas for his height, but there was nothing really aesthetic or athletic or even beautiful about that physique, but it was gnarly enough to hold the competition at bay. So that brings us to a guy that a lot of people keep talking about, and that's Lee Priest. And Lee Priest, in conversation with respect to me, there is no conversation. I mean, Lee had some body parts. He had phenomenal calves, big flaring quadriceps, hamstrings that didn't match up in terms of the detail nor the definition, and a very weak back along the lines of a Labrada in terms of not having that density or the separation, always a film of water and fat on the backside. And from the front, very strong muscularity, a very weak upper pecs in general. His arms were overpowering, very good shoulders, but there were body parts, and in its totality, it wasn't a physique that was ever going to beat me, never did, and it didn't beat a lot of guys that I was routinely beating throughout my career. I beat Nasser, I beat Kevin Levrone, I beat Flex Wheeler, I beat Paul Dillette. All of those guys, Lee Priest never beat. As a matter of fact, I believe Lee got Paul Dillette once. So that brings us to the reigning champion, 4-time champion from Wales, James Flex Lewis. I watched this kid turn into a man, and a man he is. He's held everybody at bay. Again, very hard, gnarly-looking body. His calves and quads are superior to everything else. He's put on a lot of size on his arms. He gets in that very hard condition. His chest is very shallow by comparison. But that being said, I can only compare his era to my era. And if James Flex Lewis was competing today in the Open Mr. Olympia, is he a guy that we'd be talking about in the top 5 of the Olympia with the presence of Dexter, Phil Heath, Shawn Roden, Big Ramy, Dennis Wolf? Is James Flex Lewis in that conversation? Is he a guy that can beat those guys? Or better yet, let's take James Flex Lewis and take him back to the 99 Mr. Olympia and drop him in there with Ronnie Coleman, Flex Wheeler, Kevin Levrone, Chris Cormier, and myself. Is James Flex Lewis a guy that can break into that top 5 lineup? And then you have Nasser El Somebody and maybe a Vince Taylor. I don't think so. So where does that leave me? It leaves me here. Throughout my career, routinely beating the best of the best, beating Ronnie Coleman for years prior to his first Mr. Olympia win. And he won his first Olympia in 98. Ronnie Coleman's first Olympia was in 92. So I was there in 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, and 97 beating Ronnie Coleman. The two guys I never beat through my career they share 14 Mr. Olympia titles, Lee Haney and Dorian Yates. Lee Haney's got 8, Dorian Yates has 6. And I have 2 first runner-ups that are debatable and arguable, and maybe a couple of other competitions that I could have fared well in had I entered them. So when you say you're only as good as your competition, Flex Wheeler, Kevin Levrone, Chris Cormier, they all are some of the winningest bodybuilders in the world when you combine how many victories they have throughout their careers. And I look back and say these are guys I've beaten in head-to-head competition on the biggest contest stage in the world. So if you take that physique and you drop it into the 212, where you have guys that are my size, I'm not afraid of a James Flex Lewis. I'm certainly not looking over my shoulder at a Lee Priest or a Lee Labrada or Mohammed Makaway. The guy I'd be looking at would be Samir Banu. Out of all the guys out there at 212 and under, Samir Banu in 1983 would be my chief competition. That's a physique that would be dangerous, and that would be a physique I'd be afraid of. It was a physique that I beat in the 1988 Mr. Olympia, my first time up. He's a little bit older than I am, but he was there as a competitor, and I got that feather in my cap. So it's open for debate now. People can pick and choose who they like or they don't like, but my track record is clear. I stood up against the best in the world. I wasn't categorized in a division that was limited by how tall I was or what my weight was. I stood amongst the giants and I took them out. And from Rich Gaspari to Mike Christian, Vince Taylor, Muhammad Benaziza, another guy under 212 pounds that people like to talk about that never beat me. Nasser El Somebody and Paul Dillette, the biggest of the big. These are guys that the other 212-pound guys and under would have a struggle to beat. And I beat them throughout my career. So let's fast forward it today and put James Flex Lewis and myself on a stage next to each other. His best physique and my best physique. I think we'd be hard-pressed to take James' best physique and stick it into the top 3 lineup of any of those Olympias that I was in the top 3. We may find 1 or 2 he could squeeze into the top 6. Maybe the 97 Olympia, he can get in there. But I don't believe he would be able to take that physique and put it in my era and stay in the top 5 for 12 years. So for that reason, by default, he is out. I'm in. I am the champion once again. And the boards are open for debate. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I sleep well at night knowing I don't have a Sandow trophy and I'm in the company of Flex Wheeler, Kevin Levrone, Chris Cormier, and other desirable Mr. Olympia winners. But the one guy I think that would rival Shawn Ray's physique at its peak and I believe I was at my peak in 94, and I believe I was near my peak in 96. My peak years were 92 to 2000 to 97. That competition would come from the 1983 physique of Samir Banu. So he's going to get the nod as the first runner-up in the 212. And I would have to say that James Flex Lewis would be battling it out with Lee Labrada for the bronze, and pulling up fourth place. I would probably lean more towards Muhammad McAway, and then I would go with maybe Ali Priest. So there you have it, the greatest of all times.